if I don't really have a lot of capital gains in this property, or I haven't taken a lot of depreciation on this property, does it behoove me to do the 1031? And if I've held it for a couple years?
Totally depends on your tax situation.
Super excited to have Peter Huy here back in the studio with us from Huy Jacob P.A, and he is our legal eagle. Peter, I want to talk today about 1031 exchange because there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to what it is, how do I do it, the benefits. So talk about it a little bit more on practicality. What if do I have to have it as an investment? Can I do it with my primary house? What does that look like?
So a 1031 at its most basic level is just a way to defer taxes on the sale of a property. It's not going to be your primary home. You think investment properties, think rental type properties.
Okay.
And the idea is you're exchanging one property for a different property. And you're basically, that's the exchange. Yeah. The deferment comes from, whatever the capital gains you had on the previous property get basically deferred.
Yeah.
So the important thing about the 1031 is not only timing, cost, but also understanding, and I'll start with this. The 1031 is actually a third party. It's not me. I'm not the 1031. It's a separate company.
As a closing agent, if you're closing it, you're not the 1031.
Generally, that's correct. So basically, if I represent a seller or a buyer, I can't touch the money because I'm representing them. Okay.
Yeah.
So an independent third party holds that money.
Okay.
That's where the 1031 comes in. But you've got it. So if you're selling a property, you need to hire, engage your 1031 first.
Right.
It's a really simple process. They get some information from you, and then ultimately their role is, instead of you or the seller proceeds of your transaction going into your bank account, it goes into the 1031's account. And then we start looking at timing. From that point forward, you've got 45 days to identify a like-kind property, and then you've got 180 days from your previous closing to close on one of the properties that you identified.
So if in this market, it would behoove me to have it under contract within those 45 days.
That's correct.
So that I'm not looking and scrambling. And then as long as I close within 6 months, 180 days, that's 6 months, right? Roughly.
I'm not a mathematician, but that sounds about right.
It's about right. I'm good to go. Now, if I don't really have a lot of capital gains in this property, or I haven't taken a lot of depreciation on this property, does it behoove me to do the 1031? And if I've held it for a couple years?
Totally depends on your tax situation.
Okay.
So let's talk about cost. You are going to want to find out what the cost of the 1031 is. Generally, a forward exchange, you're looking at a few $1,000s just to do the 1031. So usually that'll be beneficial. A reverse 1031 exchange, though, the costs can start climbing. Sometimes climbing to the point where maybe it doesn't make sense to do the reverse 1031 because your tax savings aren't that great.
So let's talk a little bit about reverse 1031 because people may not know that they can actually buy the second property in advance of closing.
So, and let's start with a reverse is going to be a lot more expensive.
Okay.
But yes, the idea is it's basically a reverse of the forward. Instead of selling, identifying, and buying, you're going in reverse order.
Yeah.
You're buying and then eventually selling the property that ultimately is going to pay for the property that you purchased.
Okay.
Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. Basically, an artificial entity gets set up to hold the property. Same rules apply as a forward. You can't really touch the asset. The individual can't, or the ultimate purchaser, the person doing the exchanger can't touch the proceeds, and including the asset. So an artificial entity gets set up to hold the asset. There's a lot of things that go into it, hence why it's a lot more expensive than a forward exchange.
So either way, I've got to tell you as my closing agent, not your realtor, not your accountant, somebody else, my closing agent, whether you're in your case an attorney, that I'm doing this.
And frankly, I should have started with that because that is probably the most important point on the 1031. If you are planning on doing a 1031, tell us. Immediately tell us, because then we can tell you, hey, this isn't some magical tax mechanism. You got to go hire somebody to handle this. We have had situations where the client thought they were doing a 1031, never mentioned it to us, thought they could do it after the fact, and that is just not the case.
Yeah. So, there's some rules to it. So if you think you apply, this applies to you. One, talk to your accountant, make sure that it makes sense. Do I want to take the tax hit now or later? If I want to take the tax hit later, then a 1031 might be a good choice for you. And if you're selling it, make sure that you tell your closing agent, your title company or your lawyer in this case, that this is something you're doing. If you have questions, please feel free. We love to answer them. You can reach out to myself or Peter. We'll have our information below. We'd love to help you.